And thank you very much for coming out tonight. I was at home earlier today working on drafts of the scorched earth speech I was going to make in my courses on Thursday, revolving around the topic of, did you come to school for the basketball team or for a humanities education? And I have to admit that seeing such a great crowd for a literary event when our Zags are playing really excites me and makes me quite pleased, so great job, all of you. So good evening and welcome to Gonzaga and the third event of our 2010 to 11 Visiting Writers Series. Please take a moment to turn off your cell phones and any other electronic device. Before I introduce our reader, I'd like to thank the many people that helped realize this event for our campus and community. Humanities Washington, a great supporter of the arts in our state, has blessed us once again with a grant to help fund our programming this year. Here on campus, the offices of the Academic Vice President, the Unity House Multicultural Education Center, the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, GSBA, and the Faculty Speaker Series generously support these readings. I'd also like to acknowledge the Davenport Hotel, a new sponsor of our series this fall, and Penaluna and Company of Coeur d'Alene. Linda McDonald of the English department helps far beyond the call of duty, and Rebecca Hofflin, a student intern who started with the series this year, has proven herself to be a fine helper. Lastly, Gail Lancaster and the campus bookstore do an admirable job subsidizing this series for Gonzaga students and staff. Books are thus available for purchase this evening at a reduced cost. Please support the author and the bookstore by making a purchase. Naomi Shihab and I will be available after her reading to sign books at the table over here to my right. So please help me in thanking all of these people. Our reader's brief biographical note reads, quote, Naomi Shihab and I describes herself as a wandering poet. She has spent 35 years traveling the country and the world to lead writing workshops and to inspire students of all ages. I was born to a Palestinian father and an American mother and grew up in St. Louis, Jerusalem, and San Antonio. She has written or edited more than 25 books, including collections of poetry, essays, and books for children and young adults. I spend many hours in class and outside of class thinking about what makes poetry poetry. Sound elements are easy to point out, rhythmical devices and elaborate patterns. But many verses utilize gregarious music and achieve nothing more than the clatter of poetic dishes. Clever metaphors and insightful similes, all of those figurative transports in which language lifts meaning and us to arrive at new understanding, might offer some definitions, but such figures only seem like a partial answer, a classification or description rather than some actual insight as to why poetry is poetry, why it compels, why it is a part of so many cultures throughout so many years of human history. At about this point in my musing, I usually realize that I'm a bad rationalist, that empirical solutions to my question aren't forthcoming, that a good QED conclusion isn't going to pop light bulb into my head, probably because I seek to find the answer rather than just seek to dwell, as Emily Dickinson put it, in possibility, a fairer house than prose. I suppose that's what happens when we privilege the definitive over the provisional. And sometimes I think that we're blinded by that approach, weighed down. For when the scholarly robes are shucked, shed, cast off like a too tight suit, provisional answers, momentary stays against confusion, that is, poetry, presents itself as its own best proof. It arrives and announces that arrival, like a mysterious guest to whom we should extend gracious welcome. Naomi Shihab and I writes, quote, answer if you hear the words under the words. Otherwise, it is just a world with a lot of rough edges, difficult to get through, and our pockets full of stones. The words under the words, not in some hidden meaning sort of way, but as the necessary language which allows us to listen to one another, to chuck away the rocks in our pockets and enter our worlds with light steps and attentive hearts. Please help me welcome a poet who hears and writes and gives us the words under the words, who helps us find poetry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Todd Marshall. I'm very touched by that beautiful introduction, and I'm extremely touched that all of you would come out tonight when there is a basketball game. I am a basketball fan living in San Antonio where the Spurs live, and I like college basketball as well, university basketball, and I really appreciate your sacrificing a game for this reading. I feel that coming to your campus, Gonzaga University, and being in Spokane is a privilege and a pleasure immeasurable. And there are certain places one arrives where you feel, I wish I could stay here a lot longer. There's so much to discover around here, so much to look at, so much to know. Spokane has strongly struck me that way, and I thank you for that welcome. My husband was here about 12 years ago having a show of his photographs. Some of you might have seen it. It was a show called Children of Children about teen parents. His name is Michael Nye, and he remembers Spokane as one of the warmest communities he's visited anywhere in the United States. So he told me I would have a great time. Also, when I checked into the Davenport Hotel and decided I would be spending the rest of my life there, things looked up. No more chores for me. Just that little button you press, it says housekeeping, and a green button goes on your door. No, it's an amazing hotel. I've been fond of historic hotels all my life. Our father had a business in the old Sheraton Jefferson Hotel in downtown St. Louis on the side of being a journalist when we were kids. So we spent our summers in a historic hotel, but it was nothing like the Davenport. You really have a treasure there, and it's an honor to get to poke around. Also, when I entered yesterday and saw the memorial plaque that said that one of my childhood favorite poets, Vachel Lindsay, had lived in that hotel for 5 years, I almost fainted on the ground and have been prowling around ever since, imagining his spirit in there. Thank you, Dennis Held, for giving me tonight a historic book, The Candle in the Cabin, Vachel Lindsay's poems and drawings, a 1926 edition. I know what this means, and I don't own any Vachel Lindsay book. So the ones I loved as a child belonged to my grandfather, and I don't know where they went. So thank you very much, Dennis and Todd, and all of you for being here. Well, it's always great to come to the Northwest. When you live in Texas, it's nice to go to a popular part of the country. And I would like to start by reading a couple of poems from some of my iconic heroes of the Pacific Northwest. I first read William Stafford's poems when I was a high school student, and my family had recently moved to Texas for no reason whatsoever, I will throw in, and we're still there. This poem, The Sky, by William Stafford, is a later poem of his. As most of you probably know, he lived in Oregon. He loved the state of Washington, and this reminds me of all the sky over this part of the country and my part too. The sky. I like it with nothing. Is it what I was, what I will be? I look out there by the hour, so clear, so sure. I could smile or frown, still nothing. Be my father, be my mother, great sleep of blue. Reach far within me, open doors, find whatever is hiding, invite it for many clear days in the sun. When I turn away, I know you are there. We won't forget each other. Each look is a promise. Others can't tell what you say when it's the blue voice, when you come to the window and look for me. Your word arches over the roof all day. I know it, within my bowed head, where the other sky listens. You will bring me everything when the time comes. So William Stafford, The Sky, and a poem by his son, Kim Stafford. It's called Friend, Download This Free, Proclamation for Local Use. Whereas the world is a house on fire, whereas the nations are filled with shouting, whereas hope seems small, sometimes a single bird on a wire left by migration behind, whereas kindness is seldom in the news and peace an abstraction while war is real, whereas words are all I have, whereas my life is short, whereas I am afraid, whereas I am free, despite all fire and anger and fear. Be it therefore resolved, a song shall be my calling. A song not yet made shall be vocation, and peaceful words the work of my remaining days. So that's Kim Stafford. And I did look up some quotes about Vachel Lindsay today, one of the great gifts of the internet, that you can find out what other people think about other people. It's kind of fearsome sometimes. And I never look myself up, that's for sure. But this is what Robert Frost said about Vachel. Now, one thing that surprises me about this quote is that I don't think of poets or writers as being, or artists in general, as being jealous beings. I feel lucky to think of them as being very generous. Here, take this poem. Here, take this painting. Glad you like it. But this is what Robert Frost said about the man who loved your city. I was as happy about Vachel as we jealous poets, artists can be. He was one I could be happy about. Vachel was one of those disarming people, a very good boy, and one of the real kinds of geniuses. You can call it genius. You can say there was something a little strange about him, lofty, and he did some very crazy things, and he knew how to do them without trying. I always loved the stories when I was a child that he just set out walking, and that he just walked to the west. That seemed good, that you could do that. And from one of his poems, Abraham Lincoln Walks at Midnight, the fourth stanza, I think I loved the sense of presence in his poems, a haunted sense of history being everywhere around us. This is something my husband and I always talk about. He often says how when you see a photograph, you can think about what was on the edges of that photograph, and not only the time that it was taken in, but the whole history that led up to that person, that moment, and certainly about poems. So Lindsay wrote, "He cannot sleep upon his hillside now. He is among us, as in times before. And we who toss and lie awake for long, breathe deep and start to see him pass the door." From Abraham Lincoln Walks at Midnight by Vachel Lindsay. So, a few poems of mine. But I've never read this one out loud anywhere. Land of Lincoln. 3 years ago, I toured Lindsay's home in Springfield, Illinois. And I had a very didactic tour guide who knew a lot of facts and said them without much passion, I guess, or warmth. I couldn't really tell if she was a Vachel Lindsay fan or not, but she sort of gave everything the same weight that she said. And in this room, Nicholas Vachel Lindsay was born. Vachel with a V. He dropped the Nicholas upon editor's suggestion later. Here is the bed his mother lay in, his father's lamp, the fireplace they read by, the back door his doctor father went in and out of. They hadn't proven the germ theory yet, which is how the Lindsay sisters contracted scarlet fever. The family had 2 bathrooms. They had so many books. These were part of their real library. This house was considered middle class for its time, but now it seems very fine, doesn't it? Sandberg visited here often for regular meals. And you do recall, don't you, that Vachel was the one who first introduced Langston Hughes to the crowd where William Butler Yeats and all the luminaries were gathered in Chicago. Vachel went tramping out west repeatedly with no money, only poems to trade for bread, his philosophies of beauty and simplicity in his pocket. These are copies of his drawings. He stayed in this house as a grown man, too. It was his only house, the only house of a great wanderer. And he married and had children here. And it was in this room he drank the poison that killed him. Well, I fell in love with poems as a little girl, thanks to being read to. So here's to moms who read to us, to dads who tell us stories, to librarians who guide us to the shelves of poetry books when we get old enough to read for ourselves, and who tell us, you could send your poems to magazines if you like writing poems so much. That was how I started sending things out. It was without any ambition of a future career, just the notion that if a poem were published in a magazine, you might have friends you didn't even know. I started sending them out at 7. The librarian told me I might have to send out 20 before one was accepted. I sent out 8, so I felt lucky. And I continued sending them out, and that was it. To this day, I've never had a publishing agent. And it did seem that little tiny magical things would happen when you sent your poems out into the world. They could have lives of their own. Someone could write you back. You could suddenly have a thought that helped you live just because a poem had gone out. Because you read poems, you would be granted so many friends in the world whom you might not meet. So I grew up with a lot of questions, still have them. I grew up hoping we were past times of war. Still regret that. And here's one called The Day. I missed the day on which it was said, others should not have certain weapons, but we could. Not only could, but should and do. I missed that day. Was I sleeping? I might have been digging in the yard, doing something small and slow as usual. Or maybe I wasn't born yet. What about all the other people who aren't born? Who will tell them? Last night I had a great pleasure of having dinner with some fantastic students from this campus, and one of them mentioned a quote I make in the beginning of a book called 19 Varieties of Gazelle, where it's mentioned that 3 major world religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all have as a commandment, thou shalt not kill. But unfortunately, it's not taken seriously. And I was quoting a Palestinian math professor whom I got to know in Texas, and he said, you know, as somebody who grew up in the holy city, as your father did, it's always haunted me how so many people say they're part of certain religions, but then they do things that are against the basic tenets of those religions. And I think it's questions that we in our current time need to keep asking. Over the years, I've been very bossy with countless students about keeping notebooks. It seems to me that's the best habit of writers, whatever you like to write. If you're writing little things down on a regular basis, the odds are you might stumble upon more of them that you like, rather than waiting for the big day in which you have nothing else to do, and all you have to do is write in it. It's rare that day comes. But if you're in the habit of writing little notes down, good things will happen. And you'll realize you can do more in 7 minutes or 40 minutes than you might have been able to do in that long-awaited whole day. So having been wandering around so long, I've had the good occasion of many people coming up to me in public in my own city and elsewhere and saying, well, thanks for bugging us to keep notebooks, because it's true. You have no idea how much you'll be given back. people have made these proclamations. I never would have known I needed to become a filmmaker if I hadn't kept a notebook, or I had no idea my whole life was getting ready to fall apart, and it was keeping a notebook that saved me. No one ever yet to this day has come up and said, I've been keeping a notebook and it did nothing for me. So I urge you out there who haven't kept a notebook till now, the shop Boo Radley has more great notebooks in it than I've seen in a long time. So go get one and start now. Fresh, to move cleanly, needing to be nowhere else, wanting nothing from any store except a notebook, to lift something you already had and set it down in a new place. Awakened eye seeing freshly. What does that do to the old blood moving through its channels? Well, we grew up asking questions about the language of news stories, since our father was a journalist. He urged us, in fact, ordered us to write letters to editors as children, and we had no idea that he had kept scrapbooks of all the letters to editors he wrote in his life. And I found them after his death, and they were very moving to me, how concise he was, how hopeful for peace between Palestinians and Israelis. And I'll read a poem relating to his own notebooks in a minute. But there was also a sense of questioning the language which becomes used in journalism or media news. And so this is one I wrote a few years ago, questioning that language. For Mohammed Zaid of Gaza, age 15. There is no stray bullet, sirs. No bullet like a worried cat crouching under a bush. No half-hairless puppy bullet dodging midnight streets. The bullet could not be a pecan plunking tin roof, not hardly. No humble pebble at our feet. So don't gentle it, please. We live among stray thoughts, tasks abandoned midstream. Our fickle hearts are fat with stray devotions. We feel at home among bits and pieces, all the wandering ways of words. But this bullet had no innocence, did not wish anyone well. You can't tell us otherwise by naming it mildly. This bullet was never the friend of life, should not be granted immunity by soft saying, friendly fire, straying death eye. Why have we given the wrong weight to what we do? Mohammed deserves the truth. This bullet had no secret happy hopes. It was not singing to itself with eyes closed under the bridge. And also questioning just language. This is a very short poem called During a War. And I was visiting the sculptor Mona Saudi in Jordan, and she has many friends in Iraq, and this was during the first years of the war in Iraq, and letters were still coming out of the country, and she had received a letter. During a war. Best wishes to you and yours, he closes the letter. For a moment, we can't fold it up again. Where does yours end? Dark eyes pleading, what could we have done differently? Your family, your community, circle of earth, we did not want. We tried to stop. We were not heard by dark eyes who are dying now. How easily they would have welcomed us in for coffee, serving it in a simple room with a radiant rug. Your friends and mine. Some of you here may have had experiences in the Middle East, I hope so, in the past where you were privileged to experience some of the hospitality that often was given in the old days and hopefully still in the future to anyone who shows up. And when we were kids, we used to hear this story, and then we used to hold our father to the test, especially when we were living in the Middle East, and people would just show up and he wasn't sure who they were. Red brocade. The Arabs used to say, when a stranger appears at your door, feed him for 3 days before asking who he is, where he's come from, where he's headed. That way, he'll have strength enough to answer. Or by then, you'll be such good friends, you don't care. Let's go back to that. Rice, pine nuts. Here, take the red brocade pillow. My child will serve water to your horse. No, I was not busy when you came. I was not preparing to be busy. That's the armor everyone put on to pretend they had a purpose in the world. I refuse to be claimed. Your plate is waiting. We will snip fresh mint into your tea. I don't know if everybody knows this, but a big stereotype about the United States now is that everyone here is too busy. And students in Europe especially ask about that. Why is everyone so busy? I'd be curious, afterwards, if at the book table some of you want to tell me your theories, because I don't really know. I have spent a lot of my adult life trying not to feel busy or overwhelmed. I cast that word out of my vocabulary 12 years ago and have felt a lot better ever since. Because now when someone says, I know you're really busy, but you can just say, no, I'm not. What do you need? And they look so shocked, they forget what they were getting ready to ask you. Also, just a comment on our lives now. Would you ever have guessed, those of you who are around my age, that we would have spent so much of our adult lives just deleting things? Doesn't that seem weird? I don't think it seems very optimistic. Like, in your free hours, you want to go delete things in your inbox. I don't like it. Well, certainly one of the most shocking moments I've had as a poet and as an adult was being at a talk in Washington, D.C. a month ago, where I was sitting with some people at a table. There were possibly 1,000 people in the audience, and the speaker was Hillary Clinton. And completely without no knowledge of mine, she quoted from 2 of my poems in her talk. Again, I almost passed out. I've had many near-fainting experiences recently. It was just very shocking to me. I couldn't believe this. So this is the poem she quoted, one of the poems she quoted from. It's called Jerusalem, and it has a quote at the top. She was giving a talk on the Palestinian-Israeli current attempts to have a better negotiations. But I quoted the Swedish poet Tommy Olofsson, who says, let's be the same wound if we must bleed. Let's fight side by side, even if the enemy is ourselves. I am yours, you are mine. And when I wrote to him for permission to use it, he said, well, I've never been to Jerusalem, but feel free. So, I'm not interested in who suffered the most. I'm interested in people getting over it. Once, when my father was a boy, a stone hit him on the head. Hair would never grow there. Our fingers found the tender spot, and it's Riddle. The boy who has fallen stands up. A bucket of pears in his mother's doorway welcomes him home. The pears are not crying. Later, his friend who threw the stone says he was aiming at a bird, and my father starts growing wings. Each carries a tender spot, something our lives forgot to give us. A man builds a house and says, I am native now. A woman speaks to a tree in place of her son, and olives come. A child's poem says, I don't like wars, they end up with monuments. He's painting a bird with wings wide enough to cover 2 roofs at once. Why are we so monumentally slow? Soldiers stalk a pharmacy, big guns, little pills. If you tilt your head just slightly, it's ridiculous. There's a place in this brain where hate won't grow. I touch its riddle, wind and seeds. Something pokes us as we sleep. It's late, but everything comes next. So that makes me think I should read a poem of my dad's, and this comes from going through these scrapbooks. And he was a person who talked a lot to anyone. And when we were kids, he never told us not to talk to strangers. He told us always to talk to strangers. And he said, strangers will help you find out what you need to know. And so it does surprise me that he never mentioned this scrapbook or these letters from a very famous person. So, sorry, I'm rooting around here. A writer's nightmare. If I don't have it, then I'm really going to be in big trouble. I don't see it. Maybe it's down here. It's right here. So I found this letter, and the poem is called Knowing. On April 16, 1953, Eleanor Roosevelt wrote a letter to my father, answering one of his own. No, she said. I do not think Arab refugees should be permitted to return to their homes in Israel. There are few homes to return to. I imagine his face, perfect burn of indignation. He would carry his lost home into the next millennium and never enter it again, though it remains intact till now. She numbered her answers. 2. I do not know if it is advisable to internationalize Jerusalem. She had worked for black youth, the unemployed. She helped to found the United Nations. She stood up for Marian Anderson when they wouldn't let her sing. My dad, at 25, trying to support a wife and baby, wanted to sing. In 2010, the same questions dangle in air. 3, I do not know if there should be an Arab Palestine as an independent state side by side with Israel. Very sincerely yours. She signed the letter with a shaky hand from her perch at Valkill Cottage, Hyde Park, Dutchess County, New York. Such a nice address, unencumbered by numbers. Eleanor did not know. She was honest about not knowing. She would die at 78 from bone marrow tuberculosis. He would die at 80, still frustrated, still writing letters. We live on, puzzles of power unraveling around us, building new walls, proclaiming, protesting. One phrase worth clinging to, side by side. My mother says, he wrote her often. This was not her only reply. Well, here's a slightly lighter poem. I was approached by a magazine I love because it's about children's literature, the Horn Book from Boston, asking me if I had any poems about trouble. I thought, yeah. Ray LaMontagne, ask him too. Anyway, this was the poem I wrote specifically for their issue, and it's called Alive. And maybe I should say, in our local San Antonio newspaper, we not only have Dear Abby, but we have this mysterious person called Carolyn who also gives advice. So she's in here too. Alive. Dear Abby, said someone from Oregon, this is a true letter, I am having trouble with my boyfriend's attachment to an ancient gallon of milk still full in his refrigerator. I told him it's me or the milk. Is this unreasonable? Dear Carolyn, my brother won't speak to me because 50 years ago I whispered a monkey would kidnap him in the night to take him back to his true family. But he should have known it was a joke when it didn't happen, don't you think? Dear Board of Education, no one will ever remember a test. Repeat. Stories, poems, projects, experiments, mischief, yes, but never a test. Dear Joaquin Phoenix, just take a break and come back later. Dear dog behind the fence, you really need to calm down now. You have been barking every time I walk to the compost for 2 years, and I have not robbed your house. Relax. When I asked the man on the other side if you bother him too, he smiled and said, no, he makes me feel less alone. Should I be more worried about the dog or the man? And this is from a book of poems for about 12-year-old girls. Sometimes children ask, do you have a favorite poem? And I guess it would be just the first 2 lines of this poem. So I'll just stop there. Sometimes I pretend I'm not me, I only work for me. And another one from this book. This is using those quotes, the kinds of clip quotes that you paste into your notebooks. And this has 2 actual quotes from 2 very different news stories that kind of wove themselves together. Feeling wise. A lady was quoted in the newspaper. It is not so hard to feel wise. Just think of something dumb you could say, then don't say it. I like her. I would take her gingerbread if I knew where her house is. Julia Child, the famous chef, said, I never feel lonely in the kitchen. Food is very friendly. Just looking at a potato, I like to pat it. Staring down, you feel tall. Staring into someone else's eyes, you're not alone. Staring out the window during school, you become the future, smooth and large. And thank you for laughing. You're in the dark there, so I can't really see you, but I appreciate your laughing. And this is a found poem. This is remembering back. One thing I've always loved about writing for a younger audience is it helps you conjure up things from your own history or the histories of your friends that you might forget otherwise because you're kind of going into that zone. And so this is something I actually remember from when I was around 12, and I was a perpetual reader, often got in trouble for reading books during class that were not, the school assignment, or reading a book in church, or reading a book in places where someone would say you shouldn't read. Having forgotten to bring a book, she reads the car manual aloud. These are actual quotes from the current Subaru manual. Do not sit on the edge of the open moonroof. Do not operate the moonroof if falling snow has caused it to freeze shut. I thought it was a sunroof, actually. Do not place coins into the accessory socket. The cup holder should not be used while driving. Well, when then? While parked at home? At midnight with insomnia? Hi, Mom. I think I'll just go have a glass of milk in the driveway. If you need to dispose of the airbag or scrap the vehicle, never allow anyone to ride in your luggage compartment. Do not operate a defogger longer than necessary. Please remove scarf or necktie while working on engine. Never jack up your vehicle more than necessary. That's actual quotes. So you don't have to look very far to find things that could stir your mind. Well, last night I had a phone interview with some students in Montana, a state I've still never been to. It was really nice to talk to them. And they liked 4 poems in my book, Honeybee. So I told them in honor of their class, I would read these 4 poems to you tonight. And 3 of them are poems I've never read out loud. This one I have read before, though, and I don't know if this is true for any of you, but it seems very common in the modern world that no matter how much we believe in peace and dialogue and negotiation, still sometimes we may have issues with people who are close to us. Communication skills. I am working on speaking to the ones who haven't spoken to us in years. The ones swinging punches out of nowhere. The ones who decided to shun us for reasons unknown. Who wouldn't greet our group at the family reunion, but sat across the swimming pool looking wounded. The strength of strangers will help us survive. Strangers are so generous. They don't know our faults, our flaws, so they hope for the best, muttering good morning when you pass at the bridge. The consolation of strangers is endless and forgiving. But it takes all our courage with close ones sometimes, families, neighbors, best friends. Even if we believe in world peace, they will find reasons to dislike us. I think of Gandhi, who said he might never have become an activist for nonviolence if the neighbor boys had not beaten him up. And this is for any parents here who have sent off students to college, that trembling time when they're getting ready to leave. And any parents here, I'm included in both these groups, who've had them return and even move back in for a semester. And all of you who are students who've moved away and who call home now and then. The little Bun of Hours. Days that felt like sheet cakes in long silver pans, frosted or not, plenty of cake, no matter who appeared, a sift of powdered sugar, and the knife laid casually by. Maybe a sack of French bread broken in half. I liked the small stacked plates on the counter, the way you drove around in a box without going anywhere. We could send the bears to school and write notes for them to take home to their mothers, who were camels and rabbits. Sometimes I looked at a clock. When you were 4, lightning cracked my brain, and I could see all the way till now, this fist of days before you leave. It took away my sleep, my confidence. Who were we before you? Though, of course, there had been more of those years. When Cyrus says, just don't breathe down his neck, okay? I am hanging on to the little Bun of Hours, wrapping it in the softest napkin, tucking it into every pocket. Though you don't see it, you are never hungry now. The locusts thrumming their summer blues sound old. If Jesus had died by an axe, would Christians carry axes around? I apologize, but that was a question he asked when he was 3 or 4. You always asked good questions. This conversation is not finished. Remember how the stories had many endings. You laughed when we changed them. Take your laundry baskets, your first aid kit, but don't take my failings, okay? Forget the times I snapped or had no patience, okay? And I will try to remember when you liked me more than when you didn't. It is the butter on the bread. And this is called Useless. Threat alert at airport is orange. Okay, I'll put on my orange personality, orange gaze for faces all around me, for paper bags stashed next to, not in, the rubbish bin. If any of you have figured out how we're supposed to act when it's orange, let me know. And I don't know if this happens in Spokane, but in San Antonio, due to the failing days of newspapers, they've started pitching products into our yards attached to the newspapers. Like some days you get a small shampoo. Do you get that here? It's very weird. You get weird things. Chewing tobacco. And one day I found the product, but the newspaper was gone. So that was really weird. Consolation. This morning the newspaper was just too terrible to deliver, so the newsboy pitched out a sheaf of Kleenex. And that was it. That's all he gave us. You could cry over the news. And because you are compassionate people, I feel that here. I want to read this poem to you, and I haven't read it a lot, but 2 years ago, I was asked to visit a poetry project in a maximum security prison in upstate New York. And I've worked a lot with adults diagnosed with different forms of mental illness, and I had never felt nervous about entering any psychiatric unit or state hospital to work with beautiful poets everywhere. But I was a little concerned about what the evening at the maximum security prison would entail. And the wonderful poet who had started this project 12 years ago at that time was a poet whose work had found me back in the 1960s, Janine Palmy Vega, and I really admire her for what she is doing in her life, not only continuing to teach poetry to easier venues in community colleges and around her town of Woodstock, New York, but also in this prison with these men. And I was changed forever after being with them. So they read to me for 2 hours. I read to them for 1, and then we talked for 2 hours. Maximum, and then they assigned me to write a poem for them. And then when I sent it to them, they made revision suggestions, which I took. Maximum security. Vocabularies glittered in that tightly locked space. Ways of breaking through, tunneling verbs, compact, muscular descriptives you could hop a wall with, if only. Try this on your own time. What they had, time and regret. Imagine if we'd known all these words in the streets. The youngest, celebrating his birthday, sat in front, hands folded on desk, smiling softly through apologies to daughters, what happened on that avenue, a train stalled outside a school, normal days marked by sun, moon, money, and lack of it. Finely tuned gerunds clinking in succession, adjectives polished and combed. How beautiful they were in their same suits, a crowd of men you knew would help if you were falling, someone pushed you down. How every one of us has 100 ways we could go wrong, and they are very close by. They opened lines to climb out of them, past tense, more exquisite than present, and repetition, the mysterious comfort of rolling back-to-back syllables when it might be better to insert a new phrase or start over entirely, if only beams of light shaping the page. They all agreed, I guess, that education was what would have saved them all from ending up where they were, which is quite haunting to us, I would think, in a time in history when our communities often find it hard to find money for education, but not for other things. So I thought I would read 2 little pieces of prose to close tonight, and again, thank you for your really friendly ambience in this room. And the first one is a piece that took a long time to write, really, and it's a good thing I was a notebook keeper because I'd written down the notebooks long ago, more than 30 years ago. The initial notes for this were written, and then the punchline came many years later. And if you've ever wished you could go back and replay something, change what you said to that person, and who among us hasn't? In fact, William Stafford said that was the best writing assignment a teacher could ever give. Think of something you said. Now write what you wish you had said. But sometimes we're redeemed for our mistakes. Years later, something happens. So this was one for me, and it was very vivid. Museum. That's a little, very short prose piece. I was 17. My family had just moved to San Antonio. A local magazine featured an alluring article about a museum called the McNay, an old mansion once the home of an eccentric watercolorist named Marion McNay. She had deeded it to the community to become a museum upon her death. I asked my friend Sally, who drove a cute little convertible and had moved to Texas the year before we did, if she wanted to go there. Sally said, sure. She was a good friend that way. We had made up a few words in our own language and could dissolve into laughter just by saying them. Our mothers found us a bit odd. On a sunny Saturday, we drove over to Broadway. Sally asked, do you have the address of this place? No, I said, just drive slowly. I'll recognize it. There was a picture in the magazine. I peered in both directions and pointed. There it is! Pull in. The parking lot under palm trees was empty. We entered, excited. The museum was free. Right away, the spirit of the arched doorways, carved window frames, and elegant artwork overtook us. Sally went left, I went right. A group of people seated in some chairs in the lobby stopped talking and stared at us. May I help you? A man said. No, I said, we're fine. I didn't like to talk to people in museums. Tours and docents got on my nerves. What if they talked a long time about a painting you weren't that interested in? I took a deep breath, moved on to another painting. Fireworks over a patio in Mexico, maybe? There weren't very good tags in this museum. In fact, there weren't any. I stood back and gazed. Sally had gone upstairs. The people in the lobby stopped chatting. They seemed very nosy, keeping their eyes on me with irritating curiosity. What was their problem? I turned down a hallway. Bougainvilleas pressed up right against the windows. Maybe we should have brought a picnic. Where was the Moorish courtyard? I saw some nice sculptures in another room and a small couch. This would be a great place for reading. Above the couch hung a radiant print by Paul Klee, my favorite artist, blues and pinks merging softly in his own wonderful way. I stepped closer. Suddenly I became aware of a man from the lobby standing behind me in the doorway. Where do you think you are? He asked. I turned sharply. The McNay Art Museum? He smiled then and shook his head. Sorry to tell you, the McNay is 3 blocks over on New Braunfels Street. Take a right when you go out the drive, then another right. What is this place? I asked, still confused. He said, well, we thought it was our home. My heart jolted. I raced past him to the bottom of the staircase, calling out, Sally, come down immediately. I remember being tempted to shout something in our private language, but we didn't have a word for this. Sally came to the top of the stairs smiling and said, you have to come up here. There's some really good stuff. And there are old beds, too. No, Sally, no, I said, as if she were a dog. Get down here. Speed it up. This is an emergency. She stepped elegantly down the stairs in a museum trance, looking puzzled. I couldn't tell her out loud in front of those people what we had done. I actually pushed her toward the front door, waving my hand at the family in the chairs, saying, sorry, oh my God, please forgive us. You have a really nice place. She stared at me in the parking lot. When I told her, she covered her mouth and doubled over with laughter. We were still in their yard. I imagined them inside looking out the windows at us. She couldn't believe how long they let us look around without saying anything either. That was really friendly of them. Get in the car, I said sternly. This is mortifying. The real McNay was splendid, but we felt a little nervous the whole time we were there. Van Gogh, Tamayo, Picasso. This time there were tags. This time we stayed together in case anything else weird happened. We never told anyone. 30 years later, a nice-looking woman approached me in a public place. Excuse me, she said, I need to ask a strange question. Did you ever, by any chance, enter a residence long ago thinking it was the McNay Museum? 30 years later, my cheeks still burned. Yes, but how do you know? I never told anyone. That was my home. I was the teenager sitting with my family, talking in the living room. Before you came over, I never realized what a beautiful place I lived in. I never felt lucky before. You thought it was a museum. My feelings changed about my parents after that. They had good taste. I have always wanted to thank you. So that's it. And so sometimes later, it's not so bad. My husband said, "You did what? When was this?" That building is for sale right now, that old house of theirs. I'm tempted to call the realtor and impersonate a very wealthy person so I could go and look inside again. And this is one of those, so that was definitely triggered by an immediate experience that wakes up an old experience. And suddenly, your life is not just a collage, a scattering of bits and pieces. Suddenly, there's a little story in it. There's a theme. I want to go to that event tomorrow where you're telling stories you haven't told before. It sounds great. There's a connection, a thread. And that's what I've loved most about the life of writing, that you never do feel alone. It's not a lonely life. It's a very connected life, that you can walk around Spokane and feel closer to people on corners or squirrels down by the river than you might have otherwise. Conversations in an elevator. A man this morning said in the Davenport Hotel elevator, "This is just not like my regular life." And I just looked at him and said, "I know what you mean," and stepped out and thought, that's a great line. I mean, how many times in our lives are we given a moment that's a little better than our regular lives? And then we're given these moments that just come out of nowhere and we don't really want them and they overtake us and suddenly they're there. And that's this last piece I'll close with. I do love airports. I'm one of the few people remaining who doesn't mind going through security or being handed strange babies in planes and asked to hold them, or overdue planes because then you have more time to observe things. So here's wishing you all many safe journeys in your beautiful inland empire. I like that term. And thank you for welcoming me to Spokane. Gate A4. Wandering around the Albuquerque airport terminal, after learning my flight had been delayed 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of Gate A4 understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate A4 was my own gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing loudly. "Help," said the flight agent. "Talk to her. What is her problem?" We told her the flight was going to be late and she did this. I stooped to put my arm around the woman and spoke haltingly. "Shu dawa, shu biddak habibti, stana shway, min fadlik, shu bitsawi." The minute she heard any words she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought the flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to be in El Paso for major medical treatment the next day. I said, "No, we're fine. You'll get there, just late. Who's picking you up? We'll call him." We called her son. I spoke with him in English. I told him I would stay with his mother till we got on the plane and ride next to her, Southwest. She talked to him. Then we called her other sons, just for the fun of it. Then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and found out, of course, they had 10 shared friends. Then I thought, just for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets I know and let them chat with her? This all took up 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling about her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She had pulled a sack of homemade mamoul cookies, little powdered sugar crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts, from her bag, and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, not a single woman declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo. We were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There is no better cookie. And then the airline broke out free beverages from huge coolers, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving apple juice, and they were covered with powdered sugar too. And I noticed my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, had a potted plant poking out of her bag, some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country traveling tradition. Always carry a plant. Always stay rooted to somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late and weary ones and thought, this is the world I want to live in. The shared world. Not a single person in that gate, once the crying of confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. I appreciate your generous ears, and I apologize to the person here. I did promise someone I would read the poem Kindness, which I read in the student group today. I forgot to read it during the reading, but if you come over to the signing table, you don't have to buy a book. I will read it to you. And thank you to our kind bookseller for having books and having them on a discount, which I really appreciate. Thank you all.